That's an important issue though. Like sometimes I have to pull y'all out of this idea that you need to show deference to the other physicians in the practice and all of that. As a lawyer, I love a good fight. Like I'm kind of made for that, right? We're just conditioned in a different way. Like, just the nature of what we do is that we negotiate constantly. We're constantly going back and forth with I guess just requests back and forth with issues.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very exciting episode of Clinically Correlate with Azfar and Vedant. Today, we're bringing on a special guest, Michael Johnson, who is an attorney specializing in physician contract negotiation. And so let's jump right into it. Michael, first question, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in physician contract negotiation.
Awesome. I love the intro, like excited and special around physician contracts. Like I feel like I'm in the right place. I feel like this is my audience. So quick intro for me. My name is Michael Johnson. I own a small law firm called Michael Johnson Legal. Our primary practice area is helping physicians evaluate, negotiate, and occasionally enforce physician contracts, employment contracts, partnership agreements, 1099, locums per diem, just all the different ways that you could potentially contract for your work. We make it our business in the firm to understand how those deals work, help you understand them. Number one, you got to make sure you understand, negotiate them, and how to get you out when it's time to transition, try to do something different. I kind of fell into this because I fell in love with the doctor. Back in 2016, I was swiping right on a a beautiful girl who was about to match. It was a week before match, and literally during our first couple dates, she was telling me, explaining to me what match was. I had no idea what match was, and it's a totally nonsensical process. But this during this transition and then getting to know what she experienced through residency, like being able to live through all of that. We had our first kid during residency, and I started my initially a solo practice. Now we're four strong in the firm, but started a solo practice in 2019. But through those personal experiences in training and then moving into our post training life, I found it super challenging to find really good information on physician contracts, on how to do this, how to transition from training into your post-training life. So I made it my business to learn and, started helping some of Allie's upper levels navigate their first contracts, help my wife with her first moonlighting gigs and residency. She's a psychiatrist, so psychiatry, they can start moonlighting relatively early in her program. I just became fascinated with this, made this my passion. In the firm, we're very hopeful that with our work, we're able to try to affect the balance of power a bit between large employers and individual physicians. I think individual physicians should have easy access to information that helps them bridge that gap about just how employment works, how the business side works, and learn the lingo a bit, learn how to understand and defend themselves in the workplace. So that's kind of how we got here. My wife now is in her fourth year out of training. We live primarily in Milwaukee area, Wisconsin, and have a couple kids, a couple animals, typical stuff.
That's awesome. I mean, I love the passion for both, law and helping physicians. And I think, we were just talking before, but I think for folks in residency and fellowship, it's an extra feeling when someone really understands what we're going through, our time constraints, our financial constraints, and then ultimately, when we are getting that first job or we're negotiating, there's a lot of other like life stuff happening at the same time, which it seems like you already went through. So you really, really understand it. So, you know, like, I think that's where even when we were going through your website and it's like, oh man, this guy really gets it. So, kind of, you know, piggybacking off of that, you know, when you're talking to, you know, a physician or, you know, someone in training who comes to you and they want to negotiate their first contract, what exactly is that timeline like?
Yeah, so really important, I guess, initial question or kind of starting point question for folks looking to make this transition. What does it look like? What does the timeline look like? What should I expect? Um, I encourage first contract physicians to try to start their process at least 12 months in advance. I find like in your last year, those first few months, first couple months, when you're in your last year of training, not only do you have a lot of personal things coming at you, but you have a lot of things in training coming at you. Sometimes you have senior leadership responsibilities and you have interview responsibilities with medical students looking to interview for the program and just a lot of stuff going on. So I really encourage you to kind of step back into the spring before your last year or earlier, depending on your specialty, or earlier. But try to get a head start, start in the spring, start mapping out some options. First, think about some practice setting questions. We'll talk about practice setting in depth, but get an idea of what practice setting makes the most sense for you and your career goals and your aspirations. But I would say start reaching out with some initial requests for interviews, initial contacts, at least 12 months or more in advance. Occasionally, you'll run into like an employer that you really want to check out that'll say, "Hey, look, call us back in August or September," and that's completely fine. Okay, but you'll typically do some initial phone or Zoom interviews, and from a negotiation standpoint, there's really not much like asking at that point. It's really information gathering, making sure you understand what they expect of you, what are some of the most important details of the job. Is it a good fit clinically? Okay. Before we can really dive into the contracts and the non-compete clauses and the, RVU compensation models or whatever, it really needs to fit with what you want to do with your career, because just chasing money or chasing a particular title or a particular employer, that's not typically going to work out. Um, so first is making sure it's a type of work that you enjoy. Um, After some of the initial contacts, you'll probably be asked to do some sort of in-person interview, site visit, meet the physicians in person, meet staff that you're going to work with in person, view the building. Sometimes like, okay, I've seen a bunch of buildings, like this is another building, but take your time with that. Try to ask some open-ended questions during your interview process, and see what the response is like. See if you can get into some conversations, some personal conversations with some of the other physicians and see what they say. Sometimes they give you like the gold that we need to negotiate in those conversations. Like sometimes they really like are pushing the management for some access to something or something about compensation, something about work schedule or whatever it is. And sometimes if you can develop an ally within the company or within the physician, the department that you're interviewing in or whatnot, sometimes they'll just tell you like, hey, here are the pros, here are the cons, here's what you should consider asking for. Like, I wish someone would have told me to ask for this thing. The number of times that we get really cool things in contracts because a like resident or fellow just kind of developed a relationship and had the guts to ask the question of somebody and they provided an honest answer, is really high. So use your inside interviews to try to develop some relationships with folks, that might give you like real honest, direct feedback. It might even help you if we get to the contract stage and we want to make some bigger, important asks. It's really nice if we have allies within the department, within the employer, um, that will vouch for you. Okay. The next step is either an offer letter or the contract or both. Or sometimes they skip the offer letter entirely and they go straight to contract. There's really no rhyme or reason here. Um, the offer letter even sometimes comes before you do the site visit. It really just depends. There's no consistency within employers on this issue. I would say it'd be rare for an employer to send you a contract before the site visit, before they get to like really get to know you. That would maybe not be super common. But the offer letter, um, outside of academic settings, the offer letter is going to typically include some of the basics. What is your initial base salary? Probably just for the first 2 years, okay, or first year maybe. What is your work location? How much time off do you have? Um, Maybe something about some volume expectations. Maybe something about shifts, depending on how your work is set up, how many shifts, how long is the shift, that sort of thing. More of like the basics. Okay. My general advice is to consider negotiating the offer letter for deal breakers. If you're picking this job because it's at a specific location and you're doing a specific type of work, then let's make sure that is the offer that they want to provide you, that the offer letter and the contract are going to match that. Because if it's not, then you can like walk away. Like if it's truly like a walk away issue, they don't need to waste their time. You don't need to waste their time if you're just not really on the same page. If they told you, 500 during the interview and the offer letter says 300, like kind of need to figure that out too, right? Or if they say, if one of the main like important selling points that they encouraged you to value during the interview process isn't really in the offer letter, then maybe it's time to follow. It's a little bit different in every specialty. So, like for example, for us, for my wife, a couple like deal breaker issues if she would be looking for a new job. One, we have a 3 day schedule, so it's really nice. Like once you go down to something less than 5 days a week, then it's really, really hard to go back. So in psychiatry, she has a 312 schedule. So 312s was like a must. And 312s was 7 weeks off. So she does about, ends up being about 135 days of 12-hour days in psych is a long time. Okay, that's a lot. But that's like a deal breaker. So if we were going to negotiate a contract, be like, okay, this isn't in the offer letter. Just want to let you know that it'll need to be in the contract or else, this won't work. In PNPA supervision for her in psychiatry, she doesn't want to supervise NPs and PA. So that would be something that would be very, very important to know on the front end. Um, and then she wanted a productivity-based comp model. She did not want to be on a quality metrics plus flat salary model. So just like some of those like basics, like we need to make sure we are on the same page and my deal breakers are addressed. Now you shouldn't have 15 deal breakers. All right. Like there should be somewhere in range here, but there are a couple important things. Then let's make sure we address them at the offer letter. But I don't know what you've heard, but a lot of first contract physicians get kind of tripped up in that offer letter versus contract stage, like when to negotiate and how and what. Is there anything specific y'all are hearing from your colleagues?
Personally, I think it just happens so infrequently, and it happens, and people are may or may not be talking about it just because they're also trying to figure it out. That it's that information that really doesn't get passed down very well. And so every now and then it's like, oh, I happened to hear this person 3 years ago. Where are they now? Oh, no one really knows how to get in contact with them, or you just feel awkward reaching out. So, Asfar, do you have other experience?
No, I don't think we never reached that stage, right? We just talk about the very, very basics, like, what state are you working in? How many states are you trying to know? How many states license do you have to get? What is your compensation? What is your vacation like? Do you teach residents? Like, just the very basic top level information. I don't think we ever delved deeper into, well, what is the initial contract? Did you get an offer letter? I don't think I've ever asked or heard of that information being passed on. I'm sure it is done, but because we don't have these conversations, we don't get down to this nitty-gritty levels.
Awesome. Let's do it right now then. Let's keep going. So the offer letter, once you get an offer letter, look, my standing advice is that even for some of the most informed, the most well-informed physicians, I still encourage you to consider reaching out to a lawyer experienced in physician contracts to help you navigate at least from the offer stage on. Okay, probably a good time to get your team in place. Just a quick thing about fees and costs, like it can be very daunting to deal with lawyers and costs. That's a very scary thing, right? Um, with physicians, first contract physicians, any lawyer that you deal with should know that like money's coming, right? Like y'all will make a lot of money and you can pay your bills. My experience in the law firm, by the way, is like a 100% collections rate on any outstanding bills that we have. Y'all are amazing at paying your bills. It's really the only type of law where like all the clients pay their bills all the time. So any lawyer that you deal with, you really should consider asking for like a payment plan or something to spread out payment over a little bit. But look, a couple to a few grand for someone who's really gonna help you, like really get to know your goals, listen to your entire story about the interview process, like really get to know what's going on, explain the contract to you. That explaining part is probably going to take at least an hour or more, like provide some specific guidance about what to negotiate and why and helping you through that process. That's definitely worth a couple to a few grand. And if especially if you can spread it out over a few months, or you can maybe lessen the burden on a little bit, then it's definitely worth it as a good due diligence measure. But anyways, offer letter comes typically like 1 page, maybe 2 pages, and primarily looking at deal breakers. Some employers will push you really, really hard to negotiate only the offer letter and will make you feel like touching the contract is like sniffing their underwear, like you could never do that. This is the only time that you can make any request, and that is that. Um, the problem is that the offer letter doesn't really tell me some of the most important details of the contract that I really want to know about and potentially negotiate. It's really a negotiation tactic. Like they don't want you to look at the non-compete or the non-solicit or who pays for malpractice tail or like all the different creative ways that they can claw back money that they paid to you or make you weigh partial bonuses upon exit, right? All of those types of little details are things that I might want to work on a bit. So it might be true that the employer is not going to change their contract. Maybe they have, it's really a supply and demand piece. If they have enough physicians that are super interested in the job and they'll take the contract as is, then our negotiation leverage might be a little bit less. But if they don't have that, then we often have some room to make appropriate adjustments to the contract. It really just depends. But I would say that is the general idea about the offer letter and whether to negotiate the offer letter versus the contract. But ultimately, you can sign offer letters and not go through with the contract. The offer letter doesn't bind you to agree to a document that you haven't seen yet. Like that would be pretty wild, right? If they're like, yeah, you have to sign whatever the next document we put in front of you. If you sign this document, I don't see how that could ever work out. But um, you can agree to more than one offer letter at a time. But I would encourage you to make sure the employer knows that you're looking at the contract and you'll likely have additional questions and might need additional follow-up information thereafter. If you tell your employer like I'm signing the offer letter and yes, I'm coming, then they might be a bit surprised when you come back with 5 or 6 requests about the contract a week later. So I don't want them to be surprised. I don't want my negotiation opponent to feel surprised, maybe have an emotional response to, having heard a yes, but now getting a maybe. I don't really want that. So it's really good to respond to the offer letter with like a measured approach. If you end up negotiating a couple things, so be it. But once you sign it, saying thank you for the offer letter, I remain excited, but I'm looking forward to evaluating the contract in detail, and I'll likely have additional questions thereafter, and I look forward to discussing those with you. That's not saying like hard yes, I'm coming. It's saying I'm ready to move forward with the process. Now, when you get the contract, these are typically anywhere from 10 to 30 pages. They are written in legalese. They're sometimes written in like whereas and heretofore is like old English. Like, I don't know why I don't draft contracts like that in the law practice, by the way. Like, I'm not here to make it sound like this is Harry Potter or something. Like, contracts should be written in plain English, but a lot of the form deals that you guys are presented with started as like one framework 50 years ago, and no one like changed some of the basics sometimes. So it can be very difficult to just read and understand. So I would encourage you to have a lawyer help you navigate it. But here are a couple of the high points for the contract. We want to know what you're going to be compensated, what you must do to obtain that compensation. Seems pretty basic, right? And then also, how do you get out? Most first contract physicians will understand the initial base salary offering and will have some measure of understanding of like where they show up and what they're going to do each day. Okay. But very few, unless they like really do this in a thoughtful way, very few will really understand the financial and social costs of saying no to your employer and leaving. Okay. Your ability to leave a job is directly correlated with your future renegotiation leverage. You want to get something done in the future? You need to have established value with your employer. You got to be a good doctor, do good work. This is a business, make people money. Okay. You got to establish value. And then also, you need to be able to take that value somewhere else. If you only have one of those two things, or if you have neither of those two things, it's really hard to renegotiate your future contract from a position of strength. So the value piece, is largely something that you'll likely have a significant measure of control over. But the ability to transition, to take that value somewhere else, is something you might accidentally over give up in your first contract. Like, and then you realize, 5 years ago, oh, the reason that I can't get the thing done is because they know that I can't leave, I can't do something different. Now, for like the telerads folks, some of the folks that have more options, or maybe can travel a little bit better, some of these risks are a bit diminished. But primarily for folks in relatively like super subspecialties and really have a difficult time transitioning between jobs and between employers in the same geographic region because of some of these contract provisions, this can be very problematic. So like we kind of like Tarantino this thing and say, okay, you want to get something done 5 years into your career. You want to update and comp. You want a control over your staff. You want additional resources from your employer. You want to get something done. Can you get it done? Okay. If you establish value and you can take that value somewhere else, then I suggest that you're probably going to negotiate from a position of strength. But if you give up that ability to transition in your first contract before you even started work, okay, then you're kind of undercutting your future negotiation leverage. So seriously consider approaching your first contract, not from a standpoint of, oh, it'd be cool if I got a $50,000 signing bonus instead of a $30,000 signing bonus. Y'all gonna make so much money that negotiating for something that's only worth $20,000 is like very short-sighted. sometimes we can get it, and often we can. Sometimes they're very, very happy to give you $20,000, and like that's all you ask for. Like, awesome, we'll give you a little bit more money, as long as you don't ask for anything about the non-compete, you know. So I encourage you to look at this holistically, like big picture. Look at it from like a 5 to 10 year timeline. Think, okay, over this period, I'm going to make a seven-figure number, significant seven-figure number. Let's not focus on whether the relocation stipend is 5 grand or 10 grand. Let's make sure we understand how to transition, how to get out of the contract, and also what does this look like for future compensation? Yeah, the base salary offering usually lasts for a couple years, and then you'll usually have, especially if your compensation plan is based on productivity, which I believe a lot of you are, unless you're in academics. And some academics are still on productivity also, but understanding what future compensation will look like and how you might want to negotiate that can be far more valuable than negotiating some of the initial one-off sweeteners that get y'all really excited about the initial job. So, anyways, that's some of the basics about just the process. You have your initial interviews. You'll do a site visit. You might get your offer letter before or after the site visit. You might not get an offer letter at all. You might just go straight to contract. You might get both literally in the same document. It's a little bit all over the place. But once you get one of those two documents, probably time to bring on a lawyer that knows what they're doing in the space, can help you navigate it. Consider negotiating the offer letter stage on deal breakers, and then make sure when you get to the contract stage, you understand how you can get out, because those are where some of the biggest tripwires come in. Some of the saddest like transition stories that we have in the law firm are from very early career physicians. They're out for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and they're miserable. Wasn't what it was supposed to be. Something weird has happened. They need to leave town and they can't. They can't terminate their contract because they don't have a termination without cause clause. They can't leave because the non-compete restricts them from the same geographic region. They just bought $1 million house and they're going to take $100,000 bath on this $1 million house if they leave that geographic region with only 1 year. Like all the holding costs and realtor fees and all of that, you're going to lose a bunch of money. So it's some of like the basics like that we want to make sure we protect against on the front end. But I realize I'm talking a lot. So what are your thoughts on the general process?
No, that was absolutely great. Like when you asked us the question if we've heard anything about this, like we just had blank faces because I think we were just soaking it all in. I think, when you come to the contract stage and the negotiation stage, what are the specific levers for the first physician contract? So you haven't, showed you had value in the practice. They are assuming you have value from your residency training. And so what are the levers that you're pulling at that time, whether just from general knowledge that you know about the practice, or the physician knows about the practice, or like you were kind of alluding to, the specific information that they're getting through the kind of unofficial or like the other interviews that they were doing?
Yeah. So I would say that the negotiation process starts literally from the first contact. Your job throughout the interview process is to get to know folks, to gather as much helpful information that I can use at the contract stage to develop some allies within the company, within the organization, someone that's going to stand up and say, hey, look, we want to help this guy out. We want this physician to come here. So, hey, lawyer of the company that we work for, we would like for you to try your best to agree to whatever he is requesting, whatever the physician is requesting, because we really want him. A really quick step back. Lawyers are really not in the business of giving up anything in contracts. Okay. The lawyer for the practice that you're going to has no interest in saying yes to anything that you ask unless their client tells them to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if during the interview process you really haven't gathered that, and the interest within the company is really maybe lukewarm, or they have multiple folks, then we might not have that internal ally that says like, hey, look, I was CC'd on this email about these contract requests. They look reasonable to me, and I would really, really like to have them come on. Can you approve these? If the company's lawyer gets that internally, then they have leverage internally in the company to say yes and not get in trouble, right? Like no lawyer wants to get in trouble with their client because they gave away something for free. Like no one wants to do that. So think about it like that. Get information about just the nature of the practice. Make sure that it is something that you want to do. Um, y'all also have the advantage of like being the prince, you're not the king yet. Like the future is bright. You're there to come in and learn and make them a bunch of money and grow the practice and all of that stuff. So you have value. You have incredible value. Okay. The fact that y'all are paid like 60, 70K or sometimes less in training is just, it's criminal. Okay. Sometimes I need to really fight hard to like reset your internal value of what is normal. Okay. Uh, so the value is there. And then from a negotiation of the contract side, if we get to that point and you've asked important questions during the interview process, they've told you important things about the job, there must be something about the job that makes you really excited to go there compared to the other options that you have. The vast majority of you will have multiple options, but the employer that you're looking to sign with, that you're evaluating a contract for, probably told you several things that made you really excited. So let's make sure that the contract reflects that, right? It's pretty simple. It's not rocket science here. So if they made some promises, then we can ask made some promises during the interview process, the campaign promises, if you will. Let's ask about it during the contract stage and see about different creative ways to incorporate those promises into the written document so that you have something to refer back to so that they'll honor those moving forward in the future. Quick issue on interview promises. A lot of physicians will uh, talk with, so a lot of first contract physicians will talk with a lot of physicians in the practice and they'll tell them about the job. Those verbal promises are not enforceable. They talk about what the current schedule is, or what the call schedule is, or what the pre-partnership track timeline is, or how much it costs, or how the compensation plan updates automatically, or I don't know, whatever is important. Um, those verbal promises are not the contract. In fact, your contract will almost certainly have a clause that says the contract is the entire agreement, and any oral or written promises made before you sign the contract are unenforceable. That means the offer letter is unenforceable. The emails like sent back and forth between you and the practice before the contract is signed, unenforceable. Whatever was like posted in the job posting, says something specific, and then the contract says nothing about that. Well, guess what? That job posting is not part of the contract by reference. It's specifically like excluded from the contract. So be wary of relying on like outside information and really understand what the contract says for your job. But we use all that information that you gather during the interview process to then make targeted requests to the contract. That's basically how you negotiate in a, I don't know, 15-minute summary right there. But that's what we're doing. And then for the contract, I also want to make sure that we put this in I guess, a reasonable framework. Very rarely are we able to just rewrite the entire thing exactly how I want. Okay, very, very, very few are ever going to allow me to do that. Okay, I would love to. Love to change pretty much every single sentence in the vast majority of physician contracts. Pretty much every sentence is framed in a way that's more advantageous for the employer. So, with that in mind, we need to talk about priorities. What are some of the most important things that would be helpful for you? What adds the most value? What decreases the risk that you might feel stuck in a job that makes you unhappy? What are some of the ways that we could modify this to help you add value to your practice in the future? Those are some of the macro questions. I also encourage you to not nickel and dime one-off requests to employers. You ask like, hey, can we change the non-compete? They go to legal. Legal comes back a week later, says yes, no, or sideways. Hey, can you negotiate the compensation? Go back to legal. Week later, 2 weeks later, they come back. They say yes, no, or sideways. Hey, can we talk? Like, no, no, no. This kind of back and forth piece is going to frustrate employers quite a lot. Okay. They have to pay a lot of money to their lawyers, and the lawyers are super busy putting out much more like massive fires than your physician contract. Okay. Like this is not really the most important thing on their desk. So we want to make it really easy for them to read your requests, what you're asking about, and say yes, no, or sideways and get to some measure of finality. Our experience in the law firm is that when you can put together like one organized set of requests, it doesn't really work out perfect. Okay, so don't beat yourself up. It doesn't work out perfect, but to the extent that you can put them all in one set of requests and send them all together, that will help your negotiation, just positioning, leverage, that sort of thing. If you're making a request on compensation or maybe something a little bit more big picture, the two best ways to, I guess, anchor is a good word. Anchor your requests are to a competing offer or objective external data like MGMA. We use MGMA. I'm not sold that it is the like end all be all on physician contracting information. Okay. I have no problem recommending a physician take a lower paying job over a higher paying job. There's tons of good reasons to do that. And also, I don't know that MGMA is like perfect in all instances, but it is a objective external metric that we can use, we can consider using to tie to your compensation request. So if the market says the median compensation is $475, $475,932.15, it's kind of powerful sometimes to ask for that exact number. Like, oh, like that is a very specific request. Where did you get that? MGMA can also be very helpful for per unit um, compensation models. Like you're negotiating over what is the appropriate value of an RVU. Understanding what the macro level data sets say are fair and appropriate in your geographic region for your specialty and your practice setting can be very powerful. Now, if you go to an academic employer and you say, hey, here's what the Gucci's private practice pays per unit, like that's not always the most effective way, right? Like, okay, it's interesting information, but I don't think they're going to be super moved by that. But if you can show that their offering is low compared to their local competitors, either through objective data or through a competing offer. If you only had one of those two things, I'd love to have a competing offer. That'd be great. But those two things will also help you during your like developing your negotiation leverage. I forget what our initial question was. I think it was around contract negotiation and leverage, but anyways,
No,
that's where we.
no, absolutely. I think that's like the key points, like you said, having a competing offer and then having the comps from a data standpoint more broadly. And it makes perfect sense. But like you said, we're just not used to it. We don't negotiate on a day-to-day really at all. Maybe I guess we do when we ask other providers to do, consults for us and stuff like that. But it's a little bit different compared to this because at the end of the day, there's no comparative. There's just one service that can probably do that thing. So we just don't get this on from our kind of day-to-day side of the work.
That's an important issue though. Like sometimes I have to pull y'all out of this idea that you need to show deference to the other physicians in the practice and all of that. As a lawyer, I love a good fight. Like I'm kind of made for that, right? We're just conditioned in a different way. Like, just the nature of what we do is that we negotiate constantly. We're constantly going back and forth with just with I guess just requests back and forth with issues. But y'all are not really built that way. So having a lawyer that's skilled in doing this kind of help guide you and help maybe show you some of like the norms of how to communicate when it comes to this stage, I think can be very valuable. We do a lot of like ghostwriting of emails on behalf of physicians in the practice, which is kind of fun. I Some of the feedback from clients has been like, "Oh, I really like you writing my emails and coaching me on how to like deliver this message and have this awkward conversation." Sometimes in the firm we'll even like role play out some conversations a bit if we know that something like this is coming and kind of help coach you through it. Talking through someone who fights these types of deals all the time, and giving you some pointers, some tips on how to have these discussions, is sometimes some of the nicest like feedback that we get in the firm. But yeah.
No, absolutely. So I know, we had a master plan to have a two-part episode all kind of recorded on this session. I know you have another commitment after this. So just in the interest of time, I think, just for us to kind of continue just focusing on what the general kind of physicians can do. I know Asfar and I were interested in success stories and horror stories. You kind of alluded to some of these, but if you had to pick three examples of the best things you've negotiated or kind of the worst mistakes you've ever seen, I think that'd be super valuable for us to learn from.
Yeah, so in radiology specifically, and also just in general, some of the roughest contracts that I see are in private equity owned radiology. The elephant in the room here is that some of the contracts that come out of PE owned RADS practices, yeah, are totally gnarly. So if I like have like a wall of shame in the firm, it's often some of those types of contracts. There'll be clauses like yeah, we'll give you a $150,000 signing bonus, but we get to claw it back in full with interest if the contract ends for any reason, including employer termination without cause at any time in the next 4 years. Imagine that. Okay. Imagine you're handed a $150,000 check a year and a half before you finish training and said, "Here you go. We'd love to see you in 2025." And then they're like, "Oh, by the way, you've been here for 3 years, but business is bad. We're laying you off. And oh, by the way, we get to terminate you with only 30 or 60 days of notice. And oh, by the way, we get to hold on to all of your paychecks because you owe us $150,000 plus 5 years of interest. And oh, by the way, here's a demand for, $50,000, $75,000 because your final paycheck did not cover it. And we're gonna, probably sue you if you don't pay this pretty soon. So, get after it." Like, imagine that type of scenario. Like, that is not a totally wild, like out of this world type situation. I would say some of the surprises around physician contracts are just how punitive they can be when they end in a way that is outside of the physician's control. So we like to negotiate those. If you have a big signing bonus, then we want the employer to have skin in the game. Say, "Okay, employer, if you terminate my contract without cause, you can't claw this back from me. If I terminate the contract without cause, then I get credit for the amount of time I served." So if it's a 4-year commitment for under $50,000 and I want to leave after 2 years, now I only owe $75,000. Okay. So some issues like that, like negotiating those types of situations, can just add a measure of protection, of support to a physician early on in their career. Same thing for the non-compete. Imagine a non-compete that really requires you to leave town, but we ask for it to be a little bit shorter or the timeline to be a little bit shorter. Often they're 2 years. Sometimes we can get it down to 1 year. So depending on what your exit strategy might be, that can be very, very helpful. Imagine if you're radiologist and you're like, okay, I really want to be in person. I want to do most of my work in person, but I negotiated my 2 year, 40-mile non-compete down to 1 year and 40 miles. And my exit strategy is to build up a bit of an emergency fund and then terminate my contract, do a little bit of temporary telerads, take a couple vacations, chill out a bit, rest up. Maybe I'm not eating steak every night for the next year. And then I can start in a year. Like, okay, 2 year non-compete down to 1 year non-compete. And maybe even having that non-compete be unenforceable if the employer terminates without cause, same idea, could be very powerful, can add a measure of protection. We've gotten into contracts where the per unit compensation rate automatically updates based on MGMA data forever. Just create an evergreen contract. Just say, hey, look, here are the terms. Compensation is whatever, whatever. I get 90% of my productivity as like my weekly or biweekly base salary, and then every quarter I get a quarterly bonus, and my salary kind of goes up and down based on my production. So it's kind of under my control. If I want to work a lot, I'm going to make a lot. If I want to work a little, I get to make a little bit less, but some measure of control for the physician. And oh, by the way, we don't have to come back and renegotiate this per unit rate anymore because we've indexed it to an external data set. Cool. Okay. I see a lot of contracts where the physician just, maybe drops the ball a bit on renegotiating that rate. They signed a contract, let's say 2 years in advance, like our hypothet, and then they didn't negotiate for 4 years, probably because they had a $150,000 hammer over their head in our hypo, right? They kind of didn't really feel like they had the leverage. So now that rate has been stale for 6 years. You think it's going to be in a fair spot for 6 years? A lot of employers are not going to voluntarily give you a better rate without you asking or having some measure of concern that you're going to move on. Obviously, I'm talking about more employment scenarios right now, not in a practice that you own, like you kind of have a certain measure of control in that environment. But if you have some of these types of environments where that renegotiating that rate is going to be potentially problematic, or you just don't want to really fight about it indefinitely, you just want an automatic method for determining that rate, we've gotten that into contracts, and that has been really nice. If a physician has, all these issues are interrelated, by the way. If you have a massive compensation clawback issue, like that $150,000 signing bonus, or you have to leave town non-compete, 2 years, 40 miles for any type of practice, even like backing out of your subspecialty into basic DR, like even if that is prevented from something that you can do, that's an interesting way to negotiate a non-compete, by the way. At least leave open like the more general practice of your subspecialty. I like to do this for pain docs. Anesthesia pays a bunch of money right now. So if a pain doc has a 2 year, 50-mile non-compete, they have a lot of PE involvement in their practices too. They get a little wild. So in those types of environments, for example, having the option to back out into anesthesia only within the restricted period might even pay you the same or more than your primary job. And it might be very easy to stay in your home. Your kids and your family are not, changing schools. You're not changing places of worship. You're not uprooting yourself from your community to be able to work, that sort of thing.
Michael, so sorry. I think speaking of one, before we let you go, one burning question I had, because teleradiology is becoming more and more popular, how does non-competes work for pure teleradiology jobs?
So the non-compete is not super helpful for anybody, right? So
Yeah.
let's say you're working for, a telerad job that the primary location is Houston, Texas, and you live in Illinois.
Yep.
All right. Who cares about a 2-year, 30-mile non-compete around Katy, Texas? No one cares, right? The question though is around, sometimes the confusing part is around the non-solicit clause. The non-solicit clause speaks to what you can do with the valuable relationships that you develop during the practice or that the business has. Okay. So imagine you work for an employer that says, upon exit, you can't work for any location that we have a contract with. Okay. And then all of a sudden, that tiny practice that you started off with ends up buying everyone else around it and turns into a massive company. And then you're like, goodness, I might have like random non-solicit of specific hospitals, specific practices kind of sprinkled all over the country. That can be kind of weird. Like enforcement of that is a bit questionable. Like I would not plan on it just not being enforceable. Okay. Another basic thing about contracts, you cannot plan on beating out the contract. That should not be your plan. It should be, here's what the contract says, and you be prepared to honor it in full. But I don't know, maybe we can fight about it later, but I can't rely upon that on the front end. But for a telerads company that wants to protect their interests, their real business interest, by the way, is protecting you from cutting them out of whatever the relationship is with the various locations, right? Telerads is DR Telerads. If you could then go to that location and then just undercut their deal and have them pay you directly, something along those lines, probably oversimplifying a bit, okay? But they want to protect their middleman status, right? Same for US anesthesia partners and anesthesia. Same for a lot of like the bigger, the bigger platforms. They want to protect their relationship between the physicians and like the hospitals, the ASCs, the locations, right? So that is one of their strongest contract rights. And that would be the main thing that would trip you up. I see most of like the teleradiology contracts I look at, frankly, are quite lucrative, by the way. Like they're pretty good deals all in all. Sometimes they're quite flexible too. I looked at one recently that was like seven shifts every 14 days, and it was about maybe 1,000 hours of reading for something like $400,000. Like,
It's a pretty good gig.
sign me up for that. That's really cool. I love my job as a lawyer, but that's not a bad deal. Some of these can be very, very attractive. So you might want to explore it. Also, even if teleradiology is not your thing, you might want to negotiate with your primary employer to have the option of moonlighting, because you might find one of these deals that are super lucrative and you might want to pick up some additional work, make a few more bucks, and maybe also you're upset with your current employer and you're like, you know what? Maybe I want to try out teleradiology, pick up like, I don't know, 10 or 20 shifts in the next 2 months, see if I like it so that when I step away from this employer, I'm not super concerned. Like, I know I can pay all my bills because I've been moonlighting with them for 2 months and I kind of like the work. It's just fine. Having the option to moonlight externally can be exceedingly valuable, especially in medical practices that you can work tele. Psychiatry is the same way, by the way. This is also like a very much a deal breaker issue for my wife, would be the option to moonlight externally. She does primarily outpatient adult, but she loves ED psych. So she doesn't get access to that in her primary employment. So she can moonlight and do it, and negotiating for that can be very valuable. Not all contracts allow you to practice medicine outside of the confines of their job. So you want to look at that. But yeah, kind of get off of your tele question, but the tele question and the non-competes. Non-competes usually not the main issue. It's probably the non-solicit clause. And then, you might want to look at how you terminate those contracts and then what you can do outside of those contracts. They might get pretty like, I don't know, fidgety, finicky about the moonlighting piece, I think that there are some radiologists that are like reading two slides for two folks at the same time. Like, obviously, never do that. Okay. That is not okay. Like, every contract that I've ever said that you only work for one employer at a time. Like, you can't be reading two things at the same time. That's not true. But if you're looking at some tele jobs that have some weird moonlighting clauses, dig a little bit deeper and see, okay, do they just want to make sure that I'm not doing two jobs, being paid by two folks for doing the same thing? Uh, and sometimes you can negotiate around it if you ask the right questions. But yeah, those are some of the telerad issues that we see in the firm.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I feel like we could make a whole like docu-series Lord of the Rings length with you. This is some super interesting points that our listeners, I feel like, frankly, all residents need to hear because, again, this information is just not out there. The first contract we signed, a residency contract, was absolutely non-negotiable.
Yeah,
But
what a terrible like start to a job like interview experience, right? Doing this next transition is nothing like match. Like, that is actually the title of many of my residency presentations. By the way, if you're listening and you're in residency or in your fellowship, feel free to invite me on. I'd love to come do a free like tele didactics. I have set presentations, hour of my time. It's no big deal. I love doing it. Feel free to reach out to do a presentation with your residency or fellowship
so
program.
tell us how we can find you, where
Yeah.
we can find how we can find you.
So my main platform is Instagram. At Instagram at Physician Contracts, exceedingly obvious at Physician Contracts. I have a law firm. It's called Michael Johnson Legal. You can Google michaeljohnsonlegal.com. I think my SEO is starting to hit for like Michael Johnson Physician Contracts, and you can typically find it. Or maybe even if you Google Physician Contracts, I'd be curious what number I am on Google right now. So I need to get better at that, some of the SEO stuff. But physiciancontracts.com or Instagram at Physician Contracts. That's the best way to see my content, see some of the things we talk about, and then reach out from there. Eventually, my plan is to have an instructional course that walks through like what we talked about, but dives into a lot more detail. So stay tuned for that. I've got to get on that. I got to make that happen, but we're like writing it up now, trying to get out of the door. But that would be the best way to reach out to me, either through Instagram, through my websites, physiciancontracts.com, Instagram at Physician Contracts, and I'd love to chat with you.
Awesome. Yeah, this is absolutely great. We hope you can, come back on for part 2 and we can kind of continue this conversation. Thank you so much, Michael. This is great.
Yeah, thank you so much for what you guys do. I'm enjoying like listening through your podcast. It's a really cool like setup, and the conversations that you're looking to create are very interesting. So I wish you the best of luck. It seems like a really cool, interesting endeavor. Good work.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining in. We'll see you guys next time on another episode of Clinically Correlate with Azfar and Vedant. Take care, everyone.